What if the greatest battle in ancient history was won before a single sword was drawn? In the year 331 before Common Era, one man faced an army easily 5 times the size of his own. A vast sea of men gathered to erase him from the world. And while his enemies stood awake all night in the cold desert air, paralyzed by fear, he slept. The man was Alexander, the 25-year-old king of Macedon, a figure who already seemed to have stepped out of myth. He was more than a king. In his own mind, and in the minds of his men, he was a demigod. Just months earlier, in the sacred oasis of Siwa in Egypt, the priests of Ammon had proclaimed him a god's son, a confirmation of a belief he had harbored his entire life. He was the heir to Philip II, the father who had forged the Macedonian army into the world's deadliest weapon. But he was also a man driven to surpass that colossal legacy, to carve his own name into eternity. He had led his army of 47,000 hardened veterans to the heart of the Persian Empire, to a dusty plain called Gaugamela. This was the final reckoning. Waiting for him was Darius III, the King of Kings, a ruler haunted by the ghost of his own failure. 2 years prior, at the Battle of Issus, he had fled before Alexander, a moment of personal humiliation that had shaken the foundations of his empire. Gaugamela was his chance at redemption, his final opportunity to prove he was worthy of the throne of Cyrus the Great. He had summoned a force that beggared belief, a tidal wave of humanity intended to crush the Macedonian invaders through sheer weight alone. Conservative estimates place his forces at over 100,000, but to the Macedonians gazing across the plain, it looked like 250,000, a force so large it seemed to blot out the horizon. It was a living map of his empire, skilled, aristocratic horsemen from Bactria, their scale armor glittering in the sun, wild Scythian archers from the steppes, who could fire arrows with deadly accuracy from horseback, the legendary 10,000 immortals, the king's personal guard, resplendent in their gleaming armor and followed by their own retinue of servants. And then there were the new weapons, the keys to Darius's planned victory. 200 scythed chariots, their spinning blades honed to a razor's edge, were being prepared, their crews grimly confident. In a pen nearby, 15 Indian war elephants, their skin painted with terrifying symbols, shifted nervously, their presence alone a weapon of terror. On paper, this was not a battle, it was an execution. So how did Alexander plan to fight a battle he couldn't possibly win? It started with that simple, profound act of confidence the night before. In the Persian camp, the air was thick with tension and the cacophony of a dozen languages. Darius, obsessed with the possibility of a surprise attack, had ordered his entire army to remain in formation. For hours, they stood under the stars, their muscles cramping, their nerves fraying with every shadow that danced in the light of thousands of campfires. They were a massive, anxious, and increasingly exhausted machine. In the Macedonian camp, just miles away, the scene was the opposite. The veterans ate a full meal, their easy laughter echoing around crackling fires as they checked their weapons for the final time. They knew their commander. They trusted him. When his most experienced general, the old and cautious Parmenion, approached him, his face etched with worry, and urged a night attack to mitigate the terrifying numbers, Alexander flatly refused. His legendary reply revealed the heart of a man who saw himself as the protagonist of history itself. "I will not steal my victory." He would win in the full light of day, where the world could witness it. His victory had to be absolute, undeniable, and brilliant. The brilliance was in his plan, a strategy so audacious, his own commanders could scarcely believe it. The stories and strategies that shape our world often hinge on these moments of genius. If you enjoy history that focuses on the minds behind the battles, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. In his command tent, surrounded by the men who had followed him across the known world, Alexander laid it out on a map sketched in the dirt. They would not charge straight ahead. That was suicide. Their flanks would be swallowed in minutes. Instead, he would march his entire army sideways across the battlefield. Parmenion stared, aghast. This bizarre, crabbing maneuver was designed to baffle the Persian command. More importantly, it was bait. He would angle his own right flank backward, deliberately making it look weak and exposed, an irresistible target. He predicted, with uncanny certainty, that the Persian cavalry would overcommit, lunging at this apparent weakness. In their haste, they would create a fatal, momentary gap in their own line. Through that gap, he explained, pointing with the tip of a dagger, he would lead a single, all-or-nothing charge. The target wasn't the army, it was one man, Darius. Alexander was staking the fate of his kingdom on a psychological gamble and a split-second opportunity. As dawn broke over the plain, the exhausted Persian host watched as the much smaller, well-rested Macedonian army finally began to move, not forward, but into the strangest dance of death imaginable. The sun rose, revealing the sheer scale of the Persian host, a glittering, endless line of men and horses that seemed to stretch from one end of the world to the other. The order was given, and the Macedonians began their eerie, sideways march. The disciplined tramp of thousands of boots on the dry earth was the only sound. Darius and his commanders watched from the center of their line, utterly perplexed. This was not how battles were fought. This strange maneuver was pulling the Macedonians away from the ground Darius had so carefully leveled for his chariots. Fearing he was being outflanked, Darius had no choice but to order his own massive line to shift in response, a clumsy, sprawling movement that rippled through his ranks and sowed the first seeds of confusion and frustration. Tired of the strange dance, Darius decided the time had come to unleash his ultimate weapon. He gave the signal, and the earth began to tremble. 200 scythed chariots surged forward. For the Macedonian infantry, it was a vision from a nightmare. War machines pulled by armored horses, charging at full speed, with long, sharpened blades spinning from their wheels, audibly slicing through the air. They were built to smash formations and create gruesome, bloody corridors of panicked men. A roar went up from the Persian line, a sound of anticipated triumph. But Alexander was prepared. He had created a forward screen of his light infantry, agile javelin men, known as the Achaemenids. As the chariots bore down on them, these soldiers performed a maneuver that required nerves of steel. An order was shouted, and with perfect discipline, they opened their ranks. They created channels, funnels in their formation. The chariot drivers, unable to steer their maddened horses at such a speed, were drawn helplessly into these corridors of death. Once inside, they were trapped. Javelins rained down from every direction, piercing drivers and horses alike. Some soldiers lunged for the reins, pulling the chariots to a violent halt, while others heroically threw themselves at the wheels, sacrificing their bodies to jam the blades. The feared scythed chariots, Darius's great hope for a quick victory, were systematically dismantled, their attack dissolving into a chaotic, bloody failure of tangled wreckage and screaming animals. The superweapon was broken, but Darius's real power was never in his chariots. It was in his numbers. And on the far side of the field, those numbers were about to bring Alexander's army to the brink of annihilation. The entire weight of the Persian right wing, a storm of elite Bactrian and Scythian cavalry, commanded by the satrap Bessus, crashed into the Macedonian left flank. Here, the battle was not one of clever maneuvers, but of sheer, brutal survival. The flank was commanded by Alexander's most trusted general, the veteran Parmenion. His orders were simple: hold at all costs. But he was outnumbered nearly 3-1. The air filled with the roar of thousands of men and the scream of horses as the Persian tide slammed into his line. Bessus's Bactrians, considered the finest horsemen in the empire, led the charge. They were nobles, clad in scale armor, fighting with a ferocity born of pride. They smashed into Parmenion's own Thessalian cavalry, some of the best in Greece. A massive, swirling melee erupted, a chaotic duel of lances, swords, and desperate courage. The Thessalians fought with incredible skill, but for every Bactrian they pulled from his saddle, 2 more surged forward. They were being pushed back, slowly, inexorably, by the sheer mass of horsemen. Parmenion watched as his lines began to bend and buckle. Gaps appeared, and Persian cavalry poured through, threatening to surround his infantry completely and attack the Macedonian camp behind them. The Macedonian phalanx, that legendary wall of 16-foot spears, known as the Sarissa, held its ground. They were a small island of discipline in a sea of chaos. Their spear points a dense forest of death. But for every attacker they impaled, 2 more took his place. The psychological pressure was immense. The soldiers could see nothing but a wall of enemies stretching in every direction. They were isolated, fighting for their lives, and it seemed as if their commander had abandoned them on the other side of the world. Parmenion knew they couldn't hold for much longer. He sent a frantic messenger, who was cut down before he got through. He sent another, who galloped desperately toward Alexander's position, his face a mask of terror. The left flank was crumbling. The anchor of the entire Macedonian army was about to be ripped away. The whole grand, audacious plan was on the verge of collapsing into a massacre, and Alexander, on the far right of the battle, saw it all happening. He heard the distant roar of the desperate fighting. He saw the dust clouds that signaled the near collapse of his left wing. Yet he held his position, his eyes fixed, waiting. His generals beside him were pale with anxiety, watching their army get torn apart. They urged him to send help, to save Parmenion. But Alexander's focus was absolute, his nerve unbreakable. He was waiting for his moment. He saw the Persian cavalry on the left flank, opposite him, pushing wider and wider, becoming more and more disconnected from their center as they lunged for the bait he had laid. Their commander was so focused on enveloping the seemingly weak Macedonian flank that he failed to see the trap he was walking into. And then Alexander saw it, the gap. Like a crack appearing in a solid wall, a space had opened between the charging Persian cavalry and the infantry of the center, where Darius himself commanded. For a single fleeting moment, a pathway had opened in the wall of Persian soldiers. It was a suicidal path, a corridor of death leading straight to the King of Kings. But for Alexander the Great, it was the invitation he had been waiting for his entire life. He raised his spear. He turned to his elite companion cavalry, the sons of Macedonian nobles who had ridden with him since they were boys. He gave the order, a single, sharp command that cut through the roar of battle. The companions wheeled as one, forming a perfect, devastating wedge, with Alexander and his famous horse, Bucephalus, at its very tip. They charged. The thunder of 2,000 hooves shook the ground as they galloped straight into the gap, directly at the heart of the Persian army. The Persian infantry in their path, caught completely by surprise, were shattered. The Macedonian wedge was a force of pure, unstoppable momentum, a spearhead of bronze and fury aimed at the heart of the empire. The chaos was immediate and absolute. They were now deep behind enemy lines, cutting a bloody path toward their one and only target. Darius watched in abject horror from his towering war chariot. The abstract plan was now a terrifying reality. A wedge of seemingly invincible horsemen was closing on him at incredible speed. He was surrounded by his best troops, the Immortals and his royal horse guards. They fought with the desperate courage of men defending their king, throwing themselves in the path of the companions, but they could not stop the charge. A javelin thrown by Alexander himself is said to have killed Darius's charioteer at his feet. In that moment of bloody personal violence, staring across the chaos into the face of a man who fought like a demigod, the nerve of the King of Kings finally broke. He seized the reins, turned his chariot around, and fled the battlefield. What do you think was going through Darius's mind in that final moment? Was it cowardice, or the only logical choice to save his own life and rally another day? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The king's chariot was empty, speeding away from the carnage. For the 100,000 men who had followed him, that single image was more powerful than any order. It meant the battle was over, and their world was lost. The sight of the fleeing king caused the entire Persian center to collapse into a panicked mob. Their courage, tied entirely to the presence of their monarch, evaporated. They threw down their weapons and ran. Alexander, triumphant, his blood singing with victory, began a furious pursuit. Capturing or killing Darius would end the war in a single stroke. But as he galloped after his prize, the final desperate message from Parmenion reached him. His left flank was still being hammered, on the absolute brink of annihilation. The soldiers there were unaware the battle had been won. They were surrounded, exhausted, and fighting for their very survival as Persian and Indian cavalry rampaged through the Macedonian camp behind them, looting and killing. Alexander faced the ultimate choice: pursue Darius, the ultimate prize that would end the war and bring him unparalleled glory, or turn back to save his men. It was a choice between legend and leadership. He chose his men. With a curse of frustration, he reigned in Bucephalus, abandoning the chase. He rallied the companions and charged back into the thickest of the fighting. This second charge was not for glory, but for salvation. They smashed into the rear of the still victorious Persian right wing, catching them in a vice between Alexander's hammer and Parmenian's anvil. The last cohesive part of the Persian army, caught completely by surprise, was crushed. The victory was now absolute and total. As the sun set, the plain of Gaugamela was a scene of unimaginable carnage. The Persian army had ceased to exist. In their abandoned camp, the Macedonians found the spoils of an empire: mountains of gold, luxurious tents, and Darius's own mother, wife, and children. Alexander, walking through the captured camp, found the royal women prostrate with fear. He famously treated them not as captives, but with the honor and respect due to royalty, assuring them of their safety and status. It was a gesture of magnanimity that solidified his reputation. He chose his men over the ultimate prize, and in doing so, secured his legend forever. The King of Kings was now a fugitive, the Persian Empire was dead, and a new age, Alexander's age, had just begun. The story of Gaugamela is a timeless example of how strategy and courage can overcome impossible odds. If you know someone who loves epic history, share this story with them and spark a conversation about the greatest battles ever fought. This single day reshaped the world. It marked the definitive end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire and the birth of the Hellenistic Age, a new era where Greek culture, language, and ideas would spread from Greece to India, creating a fusion of civilizations that would shape history for centuries to come. The great city of Babylon opened its gates to him without a fight. The cities Alexander founded would become beacons of learning for centuries. He had proven that history is not always made by the largest armies, but by the boldest minds. If you want to see more stories about the incredible battles and brilliant strategies that shaped our world, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and have notifications turned on. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past.